I'm Sharon Crossman. I'm still with the Planning Commission. Happen at this point in time to be the chair. Other Planning Commission members are here. We are very happy to kick off this project for a wastewater study in our town. It's something that the Planning Commission's been grappling with over the years. Every time we get excited about one initiative or another for economic development, community development, we run right into the fact that there are problems with our any increased development in our community for one reason or another, but we haven't exactly been able to pinpoint them. So thus the wastewater study project. I'm happy to introduce Christina Haskins, PE from Dufresne Group in Manchester, who is part of the firm that was selected for as being our consultants to get us through this wastewater study. I'm going to let Christina explain the work that she and her company are going to do.
Just want to add one thing. I'm Shane O'Keefe, Town Administrator, and this project is funded with the $32,000 allotment from the Agency of Natural Resources that would only have to get paid back if we go forward with a major construction project. We would have to pay it back through a bond. But if we don't go forward with any kind of project, there's no impact to the taxpayers.
Thanks.
Yep.
Good point.
All right.
Here you go. Thanks for coming.
So good evening, everyone. I also wanted to add that we are joined tonight via Skype by Lynette Burrell, who is the representative from the Department of Environmental Conservation Water Investment Division. She is the one that administers the funding. So she is.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. And we can hear her because she's connected to the TV now.
Cool.
So she is a great resource to the town to help them through this process on both the funding side as well as the technical side, as Lynette is an engineer. So I'm just going to do a little presentation, and then we want to hear what everybody here has to say. So these are just some questions that we have come up with as frequently asked questions when we do these kind of studies. These are questions that people tend to ask us. And so I'm going to go through a quick presentation and answer these questions. And if you, hopefully you come up with some more while we're going through this, and you can ask them at the end. So if possible, I would ask that you hold your questions till the end. We'll get through this, and hopefully I'll answer most of them. If something is wildly unclear, please jump in and ask for clarification. So why are we doing a study? The first step in planning is always to identify the need. As Sharon was saying, the Planning Commission, every time they try to move forward on some planning initiative, they run into this wastewater constraint. At this point, we don't know if there's a need for wastewater, if there's a need to put in a community wastewater system or multiple systems. And so the Planning Commission recommended doing this study to determine if there is a need, and then how to address those needs so that they can plan for and promote sustainable development. There is currently a zoning update in progress. You might know about that. You might have heard things about that. I don't know all the details about it, but there are changes to the village business mixed use and the village residential, which is high density residential districts. There is also economic and community development, as Sharon noted. This and business sustainability, they rely in part on water and wastewater capacities. When you have areas of high density development, you have limitations on your water and wastewater capacities. Usually septic systems that are in place already, they're older, they may not meet the current wastewater regulations, and due to setbacks and isolation distances, they can't be expanded. And so this is a constraint for existing businesses as well as new businesses. Another, well, I'll get into that later. So the committee's goal, we came up with a couple of goals at our kickoff meeting that we had a couple weeks ago. And the goal for the North Village, for Londonderry Village, is focusing on maintaining existing businesses and planning for the possibility of high-density residential development directly adjacent to the village. And then the goal for the South Village is to maintain existing businesses as well as support commercial and residential growth and redevelopment along the Route 30 to 100 corridors and Main Street. And then moving into the contamination item here, the DEC and the Southeastern Vermont Watershed Alliance perform water quality monitoring in the summers since 2006. They've been doing it. The region of the West River, right here in South Londonderry, is considered to be impaired due to bacteria. This means that they have found E. coli levels, elevated E. coli levels when they sample the river. And they do their sampling right at the bridge, the Route 100 bridge. The upstream and downstream reaches are reported to be in very good condition. So they're not sure what the source of this E. coli contamination is. So we're going to do a little bit more water quality testing as part of this study, and hopefully be able to narrow down where it's coming from. It's unlikely that we'll actually be able to pinpoint a source. But that's another reason, is the contamination in the river. So one of the select board members that I work with a lot, he has a saying that we don't know what we don't know. So if we don't know things, we can't make an informed decision on them. Doing this study will allow us to gather all of the information that we need, evaluate data, identify any deficiencies if they exist, and determine a need. Once we've done all of that, then we will have a second public meeting where we will present whatever we come up with through our evaluations, and if there is a need, then we'll present it at that time and what the needs are, and we'll ask for more input. So what is the scope of our project? We are going to collect a lot of data. We're going to do that. So first of all, this is kind of what I'm calling phase one of the scope, is what's on this slide here. We don't have any official phases identified, but this is the data gathering phase. So we'll gather and map all of our data. So we're going to do some research in the state wastewater permit database, the town land records. We're going to send out a survey to property owners within the study areas, developed properties within the study areas, to get information on existing water supply and wastewater disposal. We will also obtain the water quality test results for the West River testing, and there's a lot of GIS data available from the state as well that we'll utilize. We're going to do some water quality testing, as I mentioned earlier. We were initially planning on 14 wells, but we just found out that there is some funding available through the state, so we can do a little bit more. So we're looking at potentially 20 wells. These will be residential wells. We can't do the commercial ones under the state funding. Just to clarify all of this, any water quality testing will be done at properties that give us permission to do it. We're not going to force our way into anybody's house to test your water. And the results will all be anonymous. So we're not going to point out anybody and say that this person had manganese in their water. So everything's anonymous. It actually falls under the HIPAA privacy rules, or laws, at the state level, so that's how the state keeps it anonymous. And then my company will receive the reports from the state, and we're keeping it anonymous as well. So there'll be a summary in the report, but nobody has to worry about being called out if you do agree to have the testing done. If the testing does identify any contaminants, yes.
But if something was identified in a homeowner's well that was not healthy, they would be given that information.
Yes.
Okay.
If the testing does identify any contaminants at or exceeding the MCL, maximum contaminant levels, or health advisory levels, then recommendations will be provided. Each resident or each property owner that has the testing done will receive a report of what their testing was. If there are any contaminants that exceed the levels, they'll be provided with recommendations on how to address those.
Thank you.
So yeah, anybody who does have water testing done will get a report of it. So you'll know what your results were, but nobody else will. So all of the information that we gather in step 1, we're going to use that to estimate and project wastewater flows. That gives us a volume to design for when we get to the alternatives phase. It lets us know how much, how big the systems need to be. We're also going to use population projections and any potential growth, increased density, known plan developments to estimate, to project out what future flows might look like. And all of this information will be compiled to determine need. So we'll look through and see if there's any deficiencies that we can identify and come up with whether or not there is a need and what that need or needs may be. So once we get to that point, we'll have another public meeting. That'll be public meeting number 2. That will be in late March, early April. That'll present all of the data, a summary of the data that we compiled, our evaluations and our findings. And we'll ask for input from the community again on what we're presenting as needs and get some feedback on and what folks think of that. And then after that, we'll move into identifying and developing alternatives. At this point, we have no idea what the alternatives might be because we don't know what the needs are. As part of this, as part of the alternatives development and evaluation, we are going to be doing soil test pits. Again, we're not going to dig pits on anybody's property, private property, without permission. We don't know where these test pits are going to be yet. We haven't talked about that. And there is there are some other evaluations that need to be done before we start digging anything like historic review. That's for the funding purposes. So if we do identify a private property as a good location for an alternative wastewater system, we would contact the private property owner and get permission to dig there. If we don't get permission, we won't be digging there. As part of this report, this is what's called a preliminary engineering report that we're preparing. It's what the state requires for moving forward with their funding if we were to move into final design and construction. And so part of that is looking at what the funding options are. So we will prepare a summary of funding options available to the town. And that'll combine with the alternatives and the cost estimates for the alternatives. So to give the community an idea of what it would cost to construct any of these. All of this will be summarized in a draft report, and then we'll have a third public meeting. This will probably be in October. And once we have feedback from the town, from Lynette, and from the community on the draft report, we'll issue a final report. So that's our full scope. You're probably wondering where we're going to do our study. So we have the 2 villages, and what we did was we started with so this is the North Village. We started with this purple boundary, which is the designated village boundary. And then we looked at land uses just outside of that to see if it made sense to expand on that at all, or even possibly contract on it. In this case, we looked at including some of the village residential, which actually extends up Hell's Peak. I think there was some village business or mixed use over in this area that we included. Oh, and the colors on here, your maps are just all blue. These colors are actually just based on the grand list. The blue was listed as residential in the grand list, and the orange color is listed as commercial in the grand list. This doesn't actually mean that your property is residential or commercial in current land use, but that's just what's in the grand list. And then, I don't know if you can see it, actually I'm not sure if it's on those. This hatching here, it's kind of hard to see in this screen, that is the floodplain, just for reference. South Londonderry, so this is part of it. Your maps have the whole thing. I had to divide it up to make it a little bit more visible. So this is the north end of it. So this is starting on the north end up at Hearthstone, and then continuing down 100 into South Londonderry Village, and you can see the purple outline down there. That's the village, designated village boundary. And so this is all mixed use and business, village business, I think. And then this is the actual center of the village area. So we have the designated boundary, and then we have some mixed use a little bit further to the south. And that's along Main Street, West River Road, and West River Street. And then continuing down Route 100. And then this down here, I believe, is general business. And this all extends down to No Name Road, I believe. So that is our study area. There are about 200 properties in both study areas combined. So why are water and wastewater important? Water quality, critical to human health and to a clean environment. Reviewing water and wastewater conditions, existing conditions, helps us to identify existing and or future water quality concerns. We know that there's surface water quality concerns in the West River. We don't know if drinking water supplies are affected. We also don't know where contamination is coming from. And as I noted before, we're likely not going to be able to figure that out, pinpoint that. But we may be able to narrow it down to a general area. Economic and community development. These rely in part on the wastewater capacity. And in some cases, a business might be able to operate with the existing water and wastewater capacity that's on, in the existing systems, but they can't grow. If you can't increase your water and wastewater capacity on site, so on your particular property, you can't access additional property to do so, then your business becomes frozen in time. The current regulations allow for the use that existed in 2007 to continue, even if the system doesn't comply with the rules. But no growth or expansion is allowed. So an example is if you have a restaurant, let's say with 20 seats, and they're serving 2 meals per day, they can't add 1 seat. They can't change. So they really are just frozen in time. For a new business coming in, who opens a new business with the hope that you don't grow? Most people aren't going to do that. And so it affects both existing businesses and future business development. Easier property sales. So there's kind of two parts on this one. One, if a potential business can't operate to the on the existing capacity, or they can but there's no room for increase, they might not want to purchase that building. They might go look somewhere else. On the water side, it may be something to do with not being able to obtain approval for a public water supply. Some businesses may require a public water supply approval, and there are no variances for isolation distances on public water, so they might not be able to obtain that. And then the second part of it is that, from what we hear from some real estate folks that I've spoken with, some mortgage companies won't approve a mortgage if the well and septic isolation distances aren't met, even if the state approves it. So even if the state says, we're going to approve a best fit variance for your property and we're going to allow you to operate, even though your water and wastewater aren't 100 feet apart, the mortgage company might not approve it. So that is a concern for property sales. And that's not just commercial, that's on the residential side as well. And then property values. We did some research on this for a previous study, spoke with some real estate agents who had the general consensus that property values are typically increased with community water and wastewater. This is because the sales rely on the existing infrastructure working and being compatible with future use. If the system is failing, obviously that's going to bring down the property value. And if there's no opportunity on that property, it's going to bring down the property value in the eyes of a potential buyer. So you may also be wondering, why are we talking about water when this is a wastewater study? It's a question we get a lot. So just to clarify, this is a wastewater study, and we are focusing on wastewater and wastewater solutions. Unless we find for some reason that water is clearly a more appropriate solution to address wastewater needs, then that might be an alternative. But we are focusing on wastewater. So it is difficult to talk about wastewater without talking about water. They are directly connected. Drinking water in small villages in Vermont is typically supplied through bedrock wells, sometimes springs. Once we use that water in our buildings, it becomes wastewater, goes into our septic systems, and then into the ground. It filters through the soil and goes back down into the groundwater to be reused. So they are closely tied together. In areas where water supplies are close to wastewater treatment systems, so your in-ground septic system, there could be contamination if that septic system is not properly treating the water anymore. Wastewater treatment deficiencies may lead to water supply contamination and surface water contamination. And then additionally, regulatory requirements, these two are tied together with isolation distances. Both the water supply rule and the wastewater rule require a 100-foot minimum separation between a well and a septic system. With the well being uphill from the septic, if the well is downhill, it's 200 feet minimum. And depending on a variety of other details, it could be even further. Wastewater rule allows for variances in certain situations for best fit solutions to maintain existing uses, but the water supply rule does not allow any variances. So those separations must be met. And to clarify, the water supply rule has jurisdiction over public water supplies, not private. So private water supplies, they fall under the wastewater rule and would fall under the best fit scenarios. So we're going to be sending out some surveys as we go through this study. The first one's going to be it's going to be a paper survey that actually gets mailed to property owners of developed properties in the study area. This is going to have questions on it about existing water supply. What is it? What's the condition of it? Existing wastewater disposal. What kind of system? And again, the condition. What is the current land use of that property? And are there any plans for future land use? Are there plans for subdivisions, things like that? Possible increased commercial development. So we're going to be asking all of those questions. And so the reason it's not going to everybody in town or to land-only properties is because, for one, no offense to anybody else, but we don't really care about the properties that are outside of our study area. And the land-only properties wouldn't have answers to most of these questions, so they don't have water supplies and wastewater disposal systems. So that'll go out in the next couple weeks. And if anybody needs help filling out their surveys, let me know, let somebody from the town know, somebody on the committee, and we can certainly get help coordinated to fill out surveys. If it's just a simple question, feel free to call me or email me, and I'll have Shane put my contact information up for anybody who needs it. We do want to get as many responses to this survey as we can, because that information is really going to help us with our existing conditions evaluation. We're also going to have opinion surveys, because for the rest of the people who don't live in the study area, and for the people who do live in it, we want to know what you think about all of this. So we want the entire community to be involved in this. And even though you don't live in the study area, this does affect you as a resident of Londonderry, as a business owner potentially, or a taxpayer for sure. And so we'll have at least one opinion survey. We typically do these online, so they're easily accessible. We would have a link up on the town website. And it's usually 5 questions max. It takes a couple minutes. We try to keep them really short and just get some feedback from people. So we don't yet have a schedule for when these might happen, but just keep an eye out, because we will certainly have something coming out. So that's all I had to give you a little background on what we're doing. And now I'd like to hear what everybody has to say.
I have a question.
Yes.
You had mentioned that you can't test the wells of the commercial properties, but isn't that information vital to the overall study to know?
We can't do it under the state's funding. That's for residential, private residential wells only. We might find that we want to test some wells that are commercial use, and we do have some money in our budget for water quality testing, and when this opportunity came up with the state funding, Shane and I discussed using it.
Well, I think we have budgeted 14
Yes.
tests, so we can still do 14 tests
Yes.
plus 20 residential. So,
Yep, we could.
yeah, we really ought to be doing that.
So yeah, we can certainly use that to do some commercial wells on our own.
Excuse me, but I thought, as an owner of a commercial well, I thought that information was already public knowledge, public record.
Any well that is a public water supply is. So if you're doing testing as a business owner and you're reporting that to the state, then that is, and I can get that. But a business that doesn't trigger the requirements of a public water supply would not be doing that testing, unless somehow required by the Department of Health. Yes.
How far up is this water testing up the West River? Just in Londonderry, or is it going to Weston?
The surface water testing done by the state?
Yeah, if you're going to do water testing in the West River.
Oh, we're not going to. The state, in conjunction with the Southeastern Vermont Watershed Alliance, they do testing every year. And so we're going to get the information from them.
It's been going on for years.
Yes. How far up do they go?
I know that they do testing in Weston. I'm not sure exactly where all their testing locations are, but I know they test in Weston, they test down in Jamaica. And I know I think they test 2 spots in Londonderry.
Well, there's a lot of spots. You know, you have farmers putting down manure certain times of the year. We have a transfer station that's sitting on a cesspool. We have also, I don't know if they stopped it, but septic tank trucks. You know, but for years, you just went out there, pulled the lever, out it went. You drove away. Never smelled a thing again. That's still in the ground. That hasn't washed away overnight. And the town was going to buy that piece of property until it was found out that that was contaminated. That put Bob's water wheel out of business. They contaminated his water. So they didn't buy that piece of property. That's why I asked, how far up is it gonna go? Because if you don't go far enough, how are you ever gonna tell where it's coming from?
I'm not sure where their testing locations are. The reach that they've identified is this section right here in South Londonderry.
Well, that ain't gonna solve nothing. You still ain't gonna know where it's coming from.
Oh, we don't
Other than
expect
it's in
to
the water.
pinpoint the location or the source.
There's a lot of planning and zoning for years. When you went for a business in Londonderry, the restaurant, how many tables? How many parking lot, how many parking places? You go up and down anytime, especially in the summer. Thrifty Attic, that's cars all over the place. Church parking lot full. You have to keep them out of the gas station. Now, they're getting permits to do business under false pretenses. If you don't have the parking area, you can't invite people into your shop, and life goes on. Nobody ever does anything about it. For years, they talked about lowering the dam under the bridge. Whatever happened to that? Oh, that was put in the state's hands. They have to give back to us. As far as I know, nobody ever got back, to my knowledge.
I can't speak to that.
So I find a little bit of fault with the meeting because it's not that well prepared for information. Maybe the second one will be.
Well, that's
I
the
mean, this
purpose,
group
go out
here
and get
is
it.
nothing compared to what should be here. Or it should be in the town hall.
At this point, this is really an introductory meeting, just to introduce what we're doing.
Yep.
And then at the next meeting, we'll have a lot more information.
Okay?
Yes.
So in your experience, after these studies are done, you recommend to a town, A, you need to have community septic, or the other alternative would be provide community water, or both?
Each situation is,
Depends on the
Yeah.
results of your study.
yeah, it varies by community. You know, we are focusing on wastewater here. We just did one in Marlboro, where we weren't looking at need there. They knew what their need was. And in that case, we recommended, we had 4 different alternatives for wastewater systems for them, and made a recommendation on one of those. Yes.
So when you're talking systems, you're talking pumping station, because clearly these are all right on the river. You're talking about pumping it up and out away, is that what the idea is?
At this point, we haven't talked about where we might be going with any treatment systems. So when we talk about solutions, it could be multiple, what's called decentralized wastewater, which is multiple small in-ground septic systems, and they're shared by multiple buildings. In some cases, there would be gravity collection. In some cases, there might need to be pumping, depending on topography. It's very likely that one of the alternatives, at least one of the alternatives, is going to be decentralized wastewater. That's a typical alternative with these village studies. But until we get a little bit further down the road on this, and even at the next meeting, we won't have answers yet on, well, we'll have some, no, we won't have answers yet then on how it's going to be collected or where anything will be. That'll be the last meeting that we have, because we'll collect some of that information. We're actually going to do some survey and look at elevations and see where we can collect by gravity versus pumping. And then we're going to have a committee meeting to talk about where property might be available to put treatment systems.
So then the systems they set outside of the ground, if it, like, I'm thinking South Londonderry, the only place is right behind that brick house, they've got land. Nobody else does, they're all little boxes and squares, so that's right there, that's the four corners, that's the only real property there is, you know, for a large collection, in my mind's eye, you know. I don't think we have that much land here. The other question is South Village, I think it's a historic, in the historic, that won't interfere with your studies at all? I believe we're historic district.
Okay. So typically, when we do the, so Lynette will actually be helping out quite a bit with the historic part of it. That's usually, if we're going to be, especially in a historic area, we're going to try and do a test pit somewhere that's already been disturbed somehow. If there's previous disturbance, then there's a lower likelihood of historic impacts. But that'll all be looked at. It is a requirement of the funding, so
Yeah,
we're not going to be.
I can't swear by it.
We're not going to be. We don't want to make any. We don't want to have any historic impacts.
Right. Or trouble.
If you don't mind, I was going to read something from a property owner couldn't make it and asked to read something into the record. This is from Richard and Diane Squires, and they own the building where the post office is here in South Village. We're unable to attend the meeting tonight, but wanted to voice our opinion as to the impact on our South Londonderry post office of the wastewater problem. Many years ago, the town cut off our drain field for our septic system, and that has all but destroyed the ability to utilize the building for other businesses or even community hall rental. What's the former use of that? It was the Otbells. We would sincerely appreciate anything the town could do to make the street more user-friendly. The town is seriously depressed due to this condition. It deserves some serious revamping of the wastewater problem, not only for our building, but the residents and businesses that see the potential in the town. Sincerely, Richard and Diane Squires. And we also received just a note from Josh Wenger, business owner, and he's expressed interest in this as well.
The comment from the post office, the owners there, that's exactly the type of thing we're looking at when we look at how this is affecting development. Not being able to use buildings to their full capacity, you know, having excess space that's available for either residential or commercial use, and we can't use it because the existing septic system can't be expanded, and there's no more capacity in the system. Yes?
I just had a question for Shane, or you. I just clarify the numbers on the testing, because I thought you said you can go up to 20, but then Shane was saying maybe you can go up to 34 tests.
So initially we planned on, we didn't know that there was funding available through the state. When we first put this together, there wasn't funding available through the state. And so we planned on doing 14 tests, up to 14 tests. And then we found out just, last week, that there is some funding available through the state to do 20 tests.
Residential.
Residential only on 20. And so, you know, Shane and I had talked about other ways that we could, we talked about coming up with some other ways that we could use that excess budget by having the state cover the water quality testing, but we can certainly use the budget for the 14 tests to test some other wells that aren't eligible under the state's program. So theoretically, we could go up to 34.
But if we were gonna have some savings from the testing, we thought we might be able to use that elsewhere to bolster the project somehow. But if it comes to be that there are 34 different locations, the more information the better, I'd say.
Absolutely. Yes.
For some of these businesses, maybe like the post office, will there be funds available for them to help rectify the situation?
So there's the alternatives that come out of this are likely going to be community type alternatives, and there is funding through the state available. Lynette, do you want to offer anything?
To the extent that this project ends up recommending community-based systems, there's funding available for those types of systems. We currently have new eligibilities in our program to be able to fund private wastewater systems as well. Not sure that our program is particularly cost-effective for everybody, but there are options out there. There's also other funding sources available for different types of wastewater homeowners that, for example, have bad credit. There's a program for that. There's programs to help the elderly, and there may be also programs for veterans. So we have, through the Village Wastewater website, we have a section on funding that has a table in the website that summarizes all the different types of funding that are available currently.
And as part of our report that we'll present later this year in October, we'll have a discussion on funding options at that point. Yes.
The way I've heard it and the way I've been explaining it to people is that if, especially in terms of residences, I mean, I know it, I've heard from Shane many times at select board meetings that it's affecting people who want to have a business in town and can't just because there's not enough space on the property for water and wastewater, so this will help that. But also I understand like if we own a house and we want to go from full-time residence to, say, rental, or change of use of property also kicks in the current standards for water and wastewater. Is that correct?
That is correct. So if you have a residential property and you have, let's say, 3 bedrooms, if you want to change the use of that property, or add a bedroom, maybe put in a rental unit over your garage or something. If you can't expand your wastewater to meet current regulations, then you can't do that. You can maintain your existing use, but you can't expand it at all. And that goes for both residential and commercial.
Thanks.
And there's also, if you are a part-time resident and you want to become full-time, there's also another test evaluation you have to go through on that can often be prohibited. So a lot of realtors talk about that.
Chrissy, I'm wondering if down the road in the study, if it's determined that certain areas could benefit from small community decentralized systems, is part of the study going to help the community understand the costs and what's involved in maintenance and management, how that works, and what's going to mean not only to the town's budget but to the taxpayers?
Yes, so we'll certainly talk about maintenance requirements for the different alternatives. That'll be part of the evaluation process. We'll have costs, and what we can do is, with some of these funding sources, we can actually break it down and be able to say, based on this cost and based on, we'd have to come up with some sort of assumed fee structure, but we could come up with an idea of what it would cost, or like a specific, a residential homeowner with three bedroom, we can get some ballpark numbers.
And if the need for small decentralized systems comes about, are there, you can probably help us understand what different options there are. There probably is not just one solution for that kind of situation, right?
Correct. And that'll be partially guided by the soils information that we get from test pits. And that'll help direct what we look at for those different types of systems that can be used. And then there's options for pre-treatment that can help make things a little bit smaller if space is an issue.
So when it comes for locating a system, you won't necessarily just be testing on individual properties. You'll be looking for an area that can accommodate what seems to be needed, like size-wise and type of system-wise.
Yes, so we can actually, we'll have estimated flows, and we can break that down. Based on our kind of phase one analysis, we can break that down and say, okay, we need something in this area, and we can look at the flows, come up with a preliminary sizing based on some assumptions. And that'll give us an idea of how much space we need, so that we can start looking.
Is there any kind of a limit or guideline as to either how many people or houses would use one site? I mean, how much territory can one decentralized engulfed or cover, rather?
Typically what we want to do, what we try to do, is stay below 6,500 gallons per day on a single system. And the reason for that is under 6,500 gallons per day falls under the regional wastewater program. Once you go 6,500 or more, you're under the indirect discharge program. The big difference between the two is, cost-wise, the big difference between the two is that under the indirect discharge program, you need dual alternating fields. And so, as let's say a homeowner, you fall under the under the regional wastewater program. So you have your septic tank, and then usually right into your leach field. In a indirect discharge system, you have 2 leach fields. So it significantly increases the cost of a system. So we try to stay below 6,500 whenever possible.
In general, what does that mean usage-wise? I mean, how many people or how
let's see.
Average?
So Marlboro, the one we just did was
or households?
16. We used 16 developed properties. Mostly residential. One was a town office / post office. One was basically a town hall. One was a church. And then they have an inn, a small inn. And then the rest of the properties were all residential. They were at about 6,100 gallons per day.
Oh, wow, that's a lot.
So, yeah.
And how many houses did that include?
So
16?
Mostly.
So that was about 14 houses.
And then the church and
So it gives you a little bit idea of scale. And then topography plays a lot, that comes into it a lot too, we want to feed it by gravity as much as possible because it's less expensive to do that. Initial capital cost as well as ongoing maintenance. If you have a pump, you have to pay for the electricity to run that. You have more maintenance on a pump than you do on a gravity system. So we always try to look at gravity systems as much as possible.
So in a community system, oh, sorry.
I was just wondering what the overall area or dimension was with the setback for the system that you put into Marlboro for the 18 buildings or whatever.
What was the size of the field?
Like what size site did you need to do that?
Oh, so the town of Marlboro is a little bit unique. They already own a 10-acre parcel that happens to be down gradient from all of the buildings they're serving. And so actually a good amount of that parcel was not usable due to high groundwater. There's a major drainage conveyance through there. And topography-wise, it's actually fairly steep. And so we actually just used like the two little corners of it. So we certainly didn't need all of those 10 acres, maybe one or two.
So your test plots, you're basically looking for things that are 2+ acres. You're not gonna test something on acre potentially.
Unlikely.
Yeah.
It's unlikely that we'd be looking at smaller properties like that, just because these, the decentralized systems, they're smaller systems, but they're bigger than your residential system.
So I was gonna ask, just because we've never had any of these, what do they look like and what is the homeowner left with? Is it just a pipe out of the house, direct line, or you still have a tank, you have what is it comprised of?
Well, Lynette certainly doesn't want me to say that it's a pipe just out of the house.
Directly to the system.
It really depends on the system. So basically they're like bigger versions of what you have at your house. So if you have a regular leach field at your house, I'm not talking dry wells, but an actual leach field or a mound system, it's the same thing, it's the same concept, it's just bigger. In some cases, we might look at a step system, which means that each individual house connected to the system has their own septic tank, and then there's smaller diameter pipes where just effluent, just the liquid, is being pumped to a leach field. That saves money on pipe sizes. So there's some different options. We could just go gravity collection where it just comes out of the house into a pipe, and there's manholes, and it's just a normal gravity system like you'd see in Manchester. They have a manhole, you can see the covers in the road. So it could be like that, where it comes out of the house, feeds into a collection system by gravity. So there's some different options.
What would the minimum number of households, or, what would the minimum number be for one septic system?
Again, it's going to depend on each situation. Two could be
So
a
it could be
minimum.
as small as two homes.
So it's really going to
No bigger than.
It's really going to depend on the cost benefit. What is the need versus what is the cost, and is it worth?
Mhm.
Is it worth it? Obviously, the more you can connect,
Right.
kind of the easier the cost is to share. But it's really going to come down to the cost versus the need. If that need is really high, it might be okay to have that higher cost. Yes.
I know it's, what you said, it's early going, but talk about the cost. Who, like in Marlboro, for instance, how is the cost shared? Is it, does it go to individuals, town, state, federal money, or grant money, or?
So I'm sure everybody wants me to say grant money. But as Lynette would tell you, that's not typically the case. So in Marlboro, we didn't get into how to fund it because they don't actually have a need right now. They're proactively planning for the future. for a couple of their properties that have no replacement areas. So they don't have any issues right now. They just wanted to have an idea on the shelf of what they could do if they needed it. So we didn't get into that with them. The who pays for it is really up to the community to decide. Based on the available funding, and you know, we'll certainly have those options available, you know, to present at the end of this. It might be a town cost where typically not the case, but a town could choose to share the cost amongst all its residents. It could be just the users of the system that are paying for it.
Could be a combination.
Could be a combination of it, where the town, the residents throughout the entire town say, we want to help, but we want you to pay more because you're using it, but we do want to help you. So it's really a local decision to make. It's whatever the community wants to do.
And how about the management of it? Is, if you have, say, 5 houses connected to one system, is it a homeowners association or is it a district?
So again, local decision, it could be, these could end up being town-owned. They could end up being jointly owned by the properties that are served by it. If that's the case, we certainly recommend that there be some sort of at least agreement amongst those properties, so that, you know, you don't have somebody else moves in and they don't want to pay the bill for it. And so it's certainly, you know, you want some sort of agreement for it, but who owns it, who maintains it is, again, a local decision to make.
And will you have recommendations in the end on that? At least examples of management structures?
Yes, yeah, we can certainly talk about that. Yes.
If experiences in communities where it's really proactively motivated by the commercial district and business owners and folks like that, as opposed to the municipality or residents?
It's usually a combination. Usually these projects don't move forward, and Lynette may be able to add to this. These don't move forward if you don't have the community support. And a lot of that does come from the business, because we focus on areas where there's high density businesses. And so a lot of that support does come from business owners. But I think the entire community support is important.
Yeah, the ultimate construction project that comes from one of these projects will need to be authorized by bond build. Typically, in the case of wastewaters for the whole town, there are options to create a fire district, which can still be used for a sewer district. It's just not called that under statute. So, should the town of Londonderry want to create another municipality for the governance of the wastewater, that's an option.
So for example, Winhall Stratton Fire District, that's a water system that serves Stratton, and then a lot of the high density development in both Winhall and Stratton. So they're a fire district. Over in Dover, you have the North Branch Fire District, which is actually a sewer system. And they serve all of the condo complexes in the mountain over there. So that's a fire district is a municipal-like entity.
You could do it as a utility as well.
So in Warren, they created a utility for their decentralized system. They have one large field in the wastewater rules and one large field in the direct discharge rules, and then a number of 2-user fields or single user fields that were approved under their plan. And then the municipality charges a utility fee for the septic, and they have them pumped out and that sort of thing.
There's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of different options. the alternative might be, as Lynette just said, it could be a combination of a whole bunch of different types of systems.
So we need to find out.
Anybody else?
Well, it's 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock and we're just cut off.
Hey, Chrissy, can you talk about the survey data and that privacy?
On our,
In terms of the paper surveys,
Sure.
information that you're gonna put in your report versus not put in your report?
so all of the data that we collect, so through the surveys, through water quality, obviously we need to have an address on it for it to mean something to us. But we're not gonna be putting any specific data in our report, to, identify, Joe has a wastewater problem, his failed septic is contaminating his neighbor's well. We're not gonna put that in the report. There'll be, general information, there'll be a lot of summary information, but we won't be calling out any property individually. A lot of the more detailed information, I know once things come to the town, they are public record. So a lot of the detailed information is actually gonna stay in my office. And I'm not going to provide the details to the town, just to keep it out of public record. So we are going to keep things anonymous.
So someone couldn't infer from the generalized summary that, oh, Joe's leach field
Yes.
is contaminating its neighbor.
Yes, it'll be more like, an example for the water quality testing. Out of the 20-something wells we tested, 5 of them had elevated manganese. So that doesn't tell you anything about where they are.
Will the homeowners be made aware of their issues?
Yes, anything we identify,
Yeah.
we will certainly let the homeowner know if we identify an issue.
Actually, it's just the entire results of each test for any one individual property will be going to the property owner, right? The
Yeah,
test
for the water quality testing,
Oh,
yes.
right, right.
Will you also be mapping the well shields and those septic areas?
When we did the Jamaica one, we didn't do we just did 100 foot around each well. We didn't do actual, real well shields.
Okay.
So we'll have to see how much data we get as to how much detail we can add in there. When we talk about well shields, it's if the well, so you have your well and you have a septic system that's downhill from it, there's 100 foot minimum separation. If you have a septic system, let's say your neighbor's septic system is uphill, there's a 200 foot separation. And so when we draw a well shield around a well, it's almost more of a rectangle. And so in that case, we have to look at contours and we have to figure out which direction is uphill. So we'll have to see how much detail we can put into all of that. But we'll certainly have at least the 100 foot circle around the wells.
I also wanted to just mention that should the community have failed septics, it's okay to share that with Chrissy. That as part of this process, it's important to be able to identify those, especially for funding purposes. It's important and changes your grant qualifications and the different funding programs. So having one or more failed systems is in your financial best interest should you go ahead with the project. And just because the system doesn't necessarily still have to be failed, it could have been failed in the recent past and repaired, and that information is still just as valuable. You guys still there?
Yes.
everybody's thinking. Would that be a failed system in the study area, or just anywhere in the community?
I would say within the study area, because that's the area we're looking at.
Yeah.
All right.
A lot of that information can be grabbed from the state records, I presume, so far as repairs of failed systems.
If a permit was applied for,
Right.
that's not
Right.
always the case.
I'm aware of one right down the street here that was just repaired, or a new one put in entirely.
And we can ask that specific question on
Yeah.
our survey.
What kind of response rate are you expecting from your survey? Do you think you'll get good, will you get a 75% response rate? How do you encourage people?
Unlikely,
Yeah.
75.
10%?
The last one we got 40%, which was, yeah, that was a decent response. And so in that case, we sent them out via mail, and then that was actually over in Jamaica for their water study. We sent them out in the mail, and then I maintained a list of all the ones, I checked them off as I received them back. And so everybody I didn't check off, or everyone I didn't get one back from, I gave the planning commission a list, and they went and tracked all those people down and asked them to fill them out. We got a couple more in, but some people just didn't want to.
I think the highest we've seen is around 60%.
60% is the highest.
60% is highest. I'd like to thank everybody for coming.